The 1980s were a wild time for muscle cars. Some were absolute legends that tore up the streets and left tire marks on history, while others were complete disasters that made owners want to set them on fire. American automakers were desperately trying to hold on to their muscle car glory, but emissions regulations, fuel crises, and relentless competition from imports made that almost impossible. Some cars managed to adapt and come out swinging, turbocharged beasts that slapped imports back into their lanes. Others? Total embarrassments that were about as muscular as a minivan with a gym membership. Today, we're taking a wild ride through the best and worst muscle cars of the 1980s, the iconic rides that crushed it on the drag strip, and the pathetic wannabes that couldn't even get out of their own way. When you think of 1980s muscle cars, your mind probably jumps straight to the Buick Grand National. And why wouldn't it? This car was an absolute monster on the streets. The Grand National was Buick's way of saying, yeah, we can build grandma cars, but we can also build something that'll leave you eating rubber. Let's talk specs. The Grand National featured a turbocharged 3.8-liter V6, churning out 245 horsepower in the GNX version, and that's an estimate. Some claim it was pushing closer to 300. 0 to 60? A blistering 4.7 seconds. That might not sound impressive today, but in 1987, that made it faster than a Ferrari 328 or a Porsche 911. Yeah, wrap your head around that. The best part? It wasn't just about speed. The all-black Darth Vader aesthetic made it look like it was designed to rob banks and outrun the cops. People were legitimately scared of this thing when they saw it roll up at a stoplight. You knew you were about to lose that race. But what really cements the GNX's legacy is how it flipped the muscle car script. Everyone was whining about emissions and fuel economy, and Buick just went, nah, we're gonna make a turbo V6 that embarrasses your precious V8s. The GNX didn't just hold its own, it dominated. It became an instant classic, a car that showed American muscle didn't need 8 cylinders to obliterate the competition. And the value today? Good luck finding one under 6 figures. People are still obsessed with this beast. It's the kind of car that makes you wonder why Buick doesn't just ditch the cushy crossovers and build something wild again. If the Buick Grand National was the king of the streets, the Chevrolet Camaro Iron Duke was the jester tripping over its own feet. You'd think the Camaro nameplate would guarantee at least some level of performance, right? Wrong. GM thought it'd be a brilliant idea to slap a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder in the 1982 Camaro and call it a day. The result was a pathetic 90 horsepower. 90 in a Camaro. That's less power than a modern Honda Civic. 0 to 60 took about 20 seconds, long enough for you to contemplate your poor life choices. To make matters worse, it sounded like a lawnmower choking on a pine cone. This wasn't just slow, it was embarrassing. Car magazines roasted it like a Thanksgiving turkey. Nobody wanted to be seen in one, let alone drive one. Imagine pulling up to a red light in a Camaro and getting dusted by a beat-up pickup truck. Yeah, not a great look. The whole idea was to make the Camaro more fuel efficient, but at what cost? Turning one of the most iconic muscle cars into a laughingstock? GM must have been out of their minds. Unsurprisingly, people ditched it the second they could afford anything better. The Iron Duke was a disgrace to the Camaro legacy, and it took Chevy years to crawl back from that mess. All right, after the Iron Duke disaster, Chevy must have realized they needed to make it up to Camaro fans, and boy, did they deliver. Named after the International Race of Champions, one ROC-Z was the perfect Camaro. First off, just look at it. That low, aggressive stance, the iconic IROC-Z decals, the optional T-tops. It was the kind of car you'd see in an 80s action movie with a dude in a leather jacket behind the wheel. But it wasn't just about looking the part. This thing had serious muscle to back it up. Under the hood, later models packed a 5.7-liter V8, pushing 215 horsepower. That might not sound like much now, but it was more than respectable at the time, especially compared to its gutless predecessor. Plus, it handled way better than older Camaros, thanks to upgraded suspension and wider tires. You could actually take corners without feeling like you were riding a waterbed. People loved this car. It became an instant favorite among car lovers, street racers, and anyone who wanted to look cool cruising down the boulevard. The IROC-Z was everything the Camaro needed to be, a performance icon with style to match. And the legacy? This car practically defined the late 80s muscle car scene. It was fast, affordable, and had a following that's still going strong today. People still shell out serious cash to get their hands on a clean one. It's like the automotive description of a rock star comeback. The Mustang SVO was Ford's weird science experiment that nobody really asked for. Here's the pitch. Let's take America's most beloved muscle car and make it a turbocharged four-cylinder? Yeah, that went over well. The SVO was supposed to be a sophisticated European-inspired Mustang. The engineers slapped a 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine, cranking out 175 horsepower. It wasn't entirely bad, but let's be honest, it's a Mustang. People wanted a roaring V8, not a whiny little turbo. And it wasn't just the engine that was weird. The SVO came with a funky biplane rear spoiler and a way too modern for its own good interior. It handled better than most Mustangs of the era, but that didn't matter to most. The price tag was the final nail in the coffin, around $15,000 back then, which was insane for a Mustang that wasn't even a GT. The result? Nobody bought it. The GT 5.0 was sitting right there, offering way more power and way more attitude for less money. Ford thought they could reinvent the Mustang as some kind of Euro sports car, but fans just wanted raw, unfiltered muscle. The SVO was quickly forgotten, and Ford quietly killed it off after just a couple of years. Today, some drivers appreciate it, but back then, it was the Mustang that nobody wanted. Awkward, overpriced, and completely missing the point. If the SVO was Ford's failed science experiment, the GT 5.0 was their redemption arc. This is the car that yanked the Mustang out of its pathetic era and gave it back its street cred. It's the Fox body Mustang. Lightweight, nimble, and packing a V8 that finally did the Mustang name justice. When the GT 5.0 liter debuted in 1982, it wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire with its 157 horsepower. But by 1987, Ford cranked it up to 225 horsepower with the now legendary 5.0-liter high-output V8. It wasn't just about straight-line speed, though. The Fox body was shockingly agile for a Mustang. Pair that with a booming aftermarket scene, and you had a car that could dominate the drag strip on Friday night and still get you to work on Monday. It looked the part, too. Aggressive, boxy lines, louvered taillights, and that iconic 5.0 badge that made sure everyone knew what you were packing. Whether you were a high school kid saving up your part-time job money or a grown man reliving his youth, the GT 5.0 was the dream. This car laid the foundation for the modern Mustang revival. It saved the brand from oblivion and sparked a massive following that's still alive today. And while the Fox body might not be the most refined Mustang ever made, it's one of the most beloved. The Pontiac Fiero was supposed to revolutionize the affordable sports car scene, but instead ended up being an automotive punchline. Pontiac wanted to build a mid-engine, two-seater that would be light, sporty, and cheap. Instead, they created one of the most unreliable death traps of the decade. Let's start with the powertrain. The first models came with the same 2.5-liter Iron Duke inline-4 that was famously gutless in the Camaro. A whopping 92 horsepower, barely enough to outrun a rusty lawnmower. Pontiac eventually offered a V6 option, but by then, the car's reputation was already 6 feet under. And then there were the fires. Yes, you heard me, engine fires. Due to oil leaks and overheating issues, some Fieros would just spontaneously combust. Nothing says reliability like watching your pride and joy go up in flames on the side of the highway. But even if it didn't catch fire, the Fiero still fell apart in other ways. Poor build quality, shoddy materials, and terrible suspension tuning made it feel like a cheap kit car rather than a legitimate sports car. Pontiac tried to fix it with later models, but it was too little, too late. The damage was done. If the Mustang GT was Ford's comeback kid, the Trans Am GTA was Pontiac's middle finger to anyone who said American muscle was dead. This car was unapologetically flashy, loud, and ridiculously over the top, just how a muscle car should be. The GTA packed a 5.7-liter V8, pumping out 220 horsepower. Nothing shocking by today's standards, but impressive at the time. And honestly, it wasn't just about raw power. The GTA handled surprisingly well for a big American bruiser. It had upgraded suspension, beefy tires, and enough torque to melt asphalt. The styling was exquisite. Pop-up headlights, a low-slung body, and that unmistakable screaming chicken decal on the hood. And if that wasn't enough, it had a futuristic digital dash. Even if you didn't know a thing about cars, you knew the GTA meant business just by looking at it. What really set the GTA apart, though, was its cultural impact. It became a pop culture icon, thanks partly to movies like Smokey and the Bandit and TV shows like Knight Rider. Suddenly, every kid in America wanted to grow up and own one. The GTA didn't just keep the Trans Am name alive, it made it cool again. It's a perfect representation of late 80s muscle, loud, brash, and absolutely unashamed of what it was. If you wanted to be subtle, buy a Volvo. If you wanted attitude, you bought a GTA. Who thought it was a good idea to slap a "Goes Like Hell" badge on a Dodge Omni? Carroll Shelby, apparently. Yeah, that Carroll Shelby. The man who helped create the Cobra and the GT 350 Mustang somehow decided it was a genius move to turn a compact econobox into a pseudo-muscle car. Let's be real, the GLH was fast for what it was. The turbocharged 2.2-liter inline-4 produced about 146 horsepower, and in something that weighed as much as a lunchbox, that actually made it quick. But calling it a muscle car? That's pushing it. It didn't have the rumble, the presence, or the intimidation factor that real muscle cars are known for. And while it technically did go like hell in a straight line, it also handled like a shopping cart full of cinder blocks. The front-wheel drive layout just wasn't up to the task of putting that power down without feeling like it was about to torque, steer you into a ditch. The build quality was laughable too. Cheap interior, rattly everything, and the kind of reliability that made you wonder if it would go like hell straight to the scrapyard. When it comes down to it, the GLH was a cheap hatchback pretending to be something it wasn't. It didn't belong in the muscle car conversation then, and it doesn't now. All right, hear me out. Front-wheel drive and muscle car don't exactly go hand in hand, but the Dodge Daytona Shelby Z somehow made it work, or at least tried to. Named after the iconic Daytona Speedway, this car was Dodge's attempt to bring some performance cred back to the lineup. And with Carroll Shelby himself tuning it, expectations were through the roof. Under the hood, you got a turbocharged 2.2-liter inline-4 putting out 175 horsepower. Again, not jaw-dropping, but remember, this was the 80s. Power numbers were pitiful across the board thanks to emissions regulations. What made the Shelby Z interesting wasn't just the power, but how it delivered it. That turbo lag hit like a truck, and when the boost finally kicked in, it actually felt fast. Visually, it looked like it belonged in a high-speed chase scene, aggressive nose, ground effects, and a massive rear spoiler that seemed to say, "I'm faster than I actually am." It was undeniably cool, even if it wasn't exactly dominating any drag strips. The Daytona Shelby Z was proof that turbocharging had potential in American performance cars. It wasn't perfect. It torque-steered like crazy and had that classic Chrysler build quality. But it marked a shift toward forced induction that muscle cars would seriously capitalize on in the decades to come. Mercury's answer to the rising tide of compact sporty cars was the Capri Turbo RS. Unfortunately, their answer was more like a reluctant whisper than a confident shout. The Capri itself wasn't inherently terrible. It was basically a rebadged Ford Mustang after all, but the Turbo RS version was a different story. Instead of the traditional V8 muscle, Mercury decided to go with a 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, come to think of it, but here's the problem. It made just 132 horsepower and suffered from turbo lag so severe that it felt like the car was pausing to consider your request before delivering any speed. It was a prime example of how early turbo technology often fell flat on its face. To make matters worse, the Capri Turbo RS had cooling issues that could cause the engine to overheat, and reliability was far from stellar. Even when it did work properly, the power delivery was inconsistent, and the driving experience was more stressful than exciting. The styling didn't help either. While Ford was working on revamping the Mustang's look, the Capri was stuck with an awkward, bulky design that looked dated even in 1980. The aero-inspired front end felt out of place, and the car lacked the aggressive stance that muscle car fans craved. It didn't take long for buyers to realize that the Turbo RS was all bark and no bite. It tried to look and sound sporty, but ultimately fell flat as a performance machine. By the mid-80s, Mercury had shifted focus, and the Turbo RS was just another forgotten experiment in turbocharging gone wrong.